Hey everyone, and we are back for the episode 4 serious Q&A. I've been sick all week, so my voice is just all over the place on this video, so I apologize. Who advises the show on medieval warfare? Are these the same people that helped HBO with Rome? Some of the weapons look great, but the battle formations and tactics are shaky, but that could have, been plot-driven. Well, to be fair, it's really tough to tell if something is historically accurate, as 1, the Middle Ages was 1,000 years and involved thousands of cultures and societies just in Europe, and 2, both Game of Thrones and Ice and Fire have many elements from outside of the Middle Ages. For example, the people of Westeros bathe, which is something that happened before the Middle Ages, but not much during. The Bank of Bravos is a clear parallel to the Medici Bank, something that had power in the Renaissance period. The Maesters are a parallel to the education-focused Jesuits, again from the Renaissance. The lost art of Valyrian steel parallels the lost art of Damascus steel, not lost until the 18th century. Not to mention the libraries, the telescopes, the spice trade, and the slave trade all came well after the medieval period. Yes, it seems medieval because there's knights and there's clearly feudalism and there's no guns or printing press and people are using castles and armor. But at the same time, their knowledge of infection and treating wounds is on a 19th or 20th century level. So both Game of Thrones and Ice and Fire are really mixes of historical elements. And this mix actually makes it difficult to judge the morality of characters based on historical standards. Are we supposed to be okay with feudalism and slavery and child brides and forced marriages? What about monarchy and hereditary rule? Because our story is from no period, we can really only judge them by modern standards. Why is it that every time Tyrion tried to handle the situation using the brain rather than through violence, the writers made that plan fail so that Dany could tell her dragons to burn shit up and, there, problem solved? What kind of message are they trying to send to the viewers? Why think when you have nuclear weapons and can just bomb the shit out of everything? Yes, this question really does get to the heart of everything, the whole purpose of the show Game of Thrones and the purpose of the book series A Song of Ice and Fire. A Song of Ice and Fire and pretty much all of George R.R. Martin's works are anti-war in nature. We are supposed to crawl through hell, the brutality, the stupidity, to realize in the end that all of the war, all of the revenge, was just a really, really bad idea. People die, things are destroyed, and the survivors are forever scarred. The violence is never downplayed, simplified, or glorified. It's displayed horrifically and honestly. Now, despite my ridicule of them, D&D are not complete and utter morons. They may not pay attention to logic or continuity, and yes, they're simplifying everything, but I do think they understand that this is an anti-war story. We wouldn't have had the horrors of the Battle of the Bastards or the Field of Fire if they didn't understand this. We wouldn't have had Brother Ray's speech to the Hound if they didn't understand this. That said, I do fault them for including all sorts of things that are tonally inconsistent to this message. Dany's far too easy win in Vaes Dothrak and then in Meereen are completely out of place. It's all too simplified. Additionally, Arya's fist-pumping fan service kills are also way out of place. They're far too glorified. With both of these characters, we haven't really seen the negative effects of their actions on the population or on the characters themselves. Dany is a woman who has fed people to dragons and burned people alive, but she's still giggling about boys and having romance in a cave as if these experiences have had no psychological effect on her. She has just become more badass. Or perhaps even worse, inspirational. Arya has murdered dozens of people and baked people into pies, but she's still having supposedly touching reunions and fun fights with Brienne, as if she's not damaged. Again, the violence hasn't really broken her, it's just made her more badass. Someone else pointed out that Davos was walking around all cheerful last episode, practically whistling. This is Davos, a man who lost his son, Stannis, Shireen, saw a man resurrected, and then was in the Battle of the Bastards. So yeah, as a result of this inconsistency, the message being portrayed to the viewers is not a great one. Violence is only sometimes bad, but usually really, really awesome. I weirdly do have hope for Season 8 though, when I imagine the show will finally start killing off some of the main characters. To what extent do you think the show has confused female violence with female empowerment? This is a very interesting question, as Game of Thrones is fairly unique in that it offends both feminists and anti-feminists with its portrayal of women. So what on earth is the show doing wrong? So before I get into this, I should mention that my audience is 85% male, and it's the internet, so I'm certain to have a good share of people that think feminism is the worst thing ever. But whatever, it's my channel and I'm a feminist. Now, when I talk about feminism here, I'm talking about the belief that there are gender-related barriers that hurt women that should be removed. And yes, I'm also interested in gender-related barriers that hurt men as well. Both types of these barriers come up in Ice and Fire and are pretty central to the story. In fact, let's start by talking about some gender-related barriers that hurt men. Men die 4 years earlier on average than women. Now, maybe this is partly or even mostly genetic, but it's hard to deny that at least some gender-related behavior leads men to an early grave. Men drink more, eat worse, shrug off medical attention, drive faster, take riskier jobs, and we're taught that this is manly behavior. Suck it up, walk it off, be a man, drink. Now, at least in popular entertainment, we're also taught that violence is manly as well and solves a lot of problems. James Bond, Indiana Jones, Arnold Schwarzenegger, the more violence you can bestow, the more empowered you are. Just look at how emasculated Jon is when he has to hand over his sword to the much larger and beefier Dothraki, or how emasculated Theon was when he had to run from Euron. In the real world, though, men generally don't have to deal with violence very much. Oh, maybe we do when we're bullied as a child or dealing with some drunk dude at a party. Perhaps you might think about it in avoiding the bad part of town or not giving lip to a police officer, but generally, as an adult male, you don't have to worry about violence. And so for the most part, violence in entertainment is escapism. This isn't really the case for women. A lot of women have to deal with domestic violence and have to worry about getting raped. The threat of violence affects how much they drink at a bar or a party, who they trust to drive them home, where they walk at night. Yes, men are sometimes the victims of domestic violence and rape, but certainly not to the same degree as women. So because of real-world implications, men and women are going to perceive violence and entertainment differently. And so to some, a cursory view of a character like Daenerys committing violence is that she is empowered in the same way that James Bond is empowered. And because Dany happens to be female, this is female empowerment. But to others, violence is not seen as an empowering act. It's something that hurts women, and in truth, it's something that also hurts men. So while Dany individually may be empowered by violence, she in no way is a symbol of female empowerment. Just as I would be pretty darn disgusted if James Bond were a symbol of male empowerment. And perhaps in a general sense, the larger problem is viewing violence as empowerment. In the real world, a character like James Bond would be a broken human being, haunted by PTSD and unable to function in society. And in the books, our characters do think about the people they've killed and hurt, and have remorse and guilt over it. In the show, we just have remorseless cartoons of both genders, and I hardly see that as social progress. How exactly has Dany lost Dorne? Ellaria has been captured, but what about all the other Dornish houses and the army we haven't seen? Are they seriously pulling out of their alliance with Dany when their liege lord, who shouldn't be their ruler in the first place, has been captured? Wouldn't they try to get her back? I don't understand. Yeah, this is very much a Godfather-like plot hole. Despite the plot specifically making a huge deal of how eliminating a leader simply ushers in a successor, the cycle ends when the plot demands it ends. There really is no reason for Dorne to be out of the war. If they supported Ellaria, it means they hated the Lannisters more than they supported the Martells. And Ellaria herself, being a bastard, isn't a very valuable hostage. The Dornish should have every reason to continue supporting Dany. If I had to make an argument about the Dornish change of heart, it had less to do with Ellaria and more to do with Dany's fleet and Highgarden. After those two big losses, Dany's victory seems a little less certain. Maybe they figure it's best to stay neutral and lay low. It's all a bit odd as Dorne already bent the knee to Dany, but perhaps the Ironwoods took control of Dorne and just aren't answering Dany's ravens. Why didn't Jaime throw the spear at Dany instead of galloping towards a giant dragon? Her back was turned and so was the dragon, so he would have been successful. Well, to be fair, Jaime is using his non-dominant hand. He may have figured he'd miss, and he's certainly more practiced at jousting than spear throwing. People tend to go to their known disciplines. The person that could have ended the war was Bronn. He was shown to throw a dagger quite accurately for about 200 meters, so blame him. But then again, maybe he didn't have anything left to throw, or maybe he was just really focused on saving Jaime, or maybe it's the middle of war and he just wasn't thinking. And that's the biggest thing. In the middle of a heated battle, it's hard to fault anyone for a stupid decision. I mean, who hasn't been in a sporting game where someone just passes to the other team for no reason? People do stupid things in the heat of the moment. Jon tells Davos Daenerys has a good heart when Davos asks what he thinks of her. What has Jon seen in Dany that demonstrates she has a good heart? And when has Davos seen Jon staring at her? So there is an interesting question on how well Jon and Dany know each other at this point in our story. That is, by episode 4. Jon arrived on Dragonstone during episode 3, just an hour or so before word of the Ironborn catastrophe. So I'm assuming that Euron's celebration in King's Landing that Jaime is present for is fairly contemporary with the events on Dragonstone. Euron then sails around the continent to attack the Targaryen fleet at Casterly Rock. And Jaime marches all the way to Casterly Rock to empty the larders and pick up his army, and then marches all the way to Highgarden. And then news gets back to Dragonstone about these events around the time when Jon and Dany explore the cave. Now realistically, at least 2 or 3 months should have passed for all of this to happen, but it's hard to imagine Jon and Davos exploring caves for that long, or Theon taking that long to get back from the Ironborn disaster. So let's settle on something in between. Is 2 weeks a good amount of time for Euron to sail around the continent, Jaime to march to Casterly Rock and then Highgarden, Jon and Davos to explore caves, and for Theon to get back from the Ironborn disaster? Cersei did tell Tycho Nestoris to linger for a fortnight for his gold, so I guess? Now yes, 2 weeks is a ridiculously short amount of time, but it's still a lot of time for Jon and Dany to be running into each other. They might see each other at meals, run into each other on parapets, walking up and down stairs. In fact, there's not much else to do on Dragonstone for them except to get to know each other. So I would say Jon and Dany should know each other pretty well by now, all things considered. The show probably could have done a better job communicating that. Can we take a second and think about Qyburn's dragon weapon? It's a ballista, a magey ballista that one person can quickly and easily load, but just a ballista. Is the show really saying that no one thought of trying this the first time dragons showed up? What am I missing that makes this thing such a breakthrough? So yes, we have seen ballistas before in Game of Thrones. There was one at the wall and it shot one of the giants. And yes, a ballista was certainly used in the First Dornish War to take down Meraxes. That said, the wall ballista is a different design and pointed downward, and the Dornish ballista was from a few hundred years ago using technology that may be lost or simply not available to those in King's Landing. And at least in the book, the events surrounding the death of Meraxes are kind of shrouded in mystery. So Qyburn's invention may not be super revolutionary, but then again, he may have just been talking himself up to Cersei. Additionally, he may have improved range and loadability, which are actually pretty big deals. And when it really comes down to it with technology, it's the refinement that really makes a difference. Friendster was the innovation, but Facebook was the refinement. The Newton was the innovation, but the iPhone was the refinement. Bruh, where the friggity frack are Jaime and company at? The Arizona desert? Why are the desert plateaus right at the forests of the Reach? And they couldn't double back to the Westerlands because they were heading to King's Landing? They did that just to do a Cowboys and Indians type thing. Yeah, in some ways the landscape makes a little sense, but in most ways it doesn't make any sense at all. So clearly Jaime and company are near some water, and they're apparently close enough to King's Landing for the gold to have arrived there, and for Randall Tarly to go back to the rear of the train and tell Jaime. So some fans are placing the events at Tumbleton, which as we see is pretty close to King's Landing and near some water. And there's even some hills there, so in some ways Tumbleton makes sense. That said, it's pretty clear that those hills are a source of the Mander, with water flowing down from them. They're certainly not wind-swept plateaus. Plus, why on earth would Jaime be at Tumbleton? He would be on the Rose Road. Plus, if he were somewhat close to King's Landing, he would be in the Kingswood. Plus, considering the Dothraki got there so quickly, it would stand to reason that they were near Blackwater Bay. Really, the battle should have been in a wooded environment. But yeah, they seem to have wanted to do the Cowboys and Indians thing. And in case anyone is wondering, no, this is not a book to show difference. The maps they have on HBO.com are pretty much the same. And that's all for the serious Q&A, and let's do an unserious Q&A this week. We will see you guys next time. Thanks for watching.